woozy. But let me just say that when Clive called me at 10 o'clock to say, can I make it at 11 o'clock to come, I said, okay, I'll stumble out of bed and get here. Because this school and this community, particularly the area around here, I would go so far as saying is not only a historic part of the Chatsworth or Durban community, but in fact it's a historical part of South Africa. Let me tell you why. As a young activist growing up in this community, one of the first and most important grassroots civic organizations that was set up was called the Crofton Residents Association, or CRA. And one of the sites from which the CRA operated was the Witteklip school. There were very few venues where we could actually meet. There were very few places where we could convene. And the teachers at that time, just like the teachers now, showed that sort of public spiritedness. And they took some risk, to be fair. They took some risk because our Department of Education at that time was not so happy to have community meetings taking place. The other organization that used this school as a venue was the CHA, the Chatsworth Health Association, with Sir Masla Mane, Kale, who used to be a student at the school, was part of it. So whenever I think of my own life, I always think I hold a very, very big debt for the people from the community that I came from and to schools like Witteklip. And by the way, Witteklip probably stood out as one of just 3 schools in Chatsworth that was willing to stand up in gentle ways against the apartheid regime. There were lots of very faulty school principals and teachers at that time that were collaborating with the apartheid regime, by the way, because lots of the times when I got arrested, or my brother or other comrades were arrested, it was some school principal or school teacher that actually sold us out to the system. So with those few words, I just wanted to say something about the media center and why it's so important. I went for a course recently for senior leaders of big organizations run by a specialist consultancy called Hyper Highland, and they look at how the new social media world has impacted on not just education, but on life in a very fundamental way. So the person running the course said, do you know who you are? And then I said, that sounds like a Julius Malema sort of question. Do you know who I am? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you are a digital immigrant, whereas you folks, the younger generation, are digital natives, meaning that you have been socialized and you are growing up at a time when the world has changed. And they showed us this video, which I must say I was a little bit taken aback, of a 3-year-old Swedish child, right, on an iPad. The child was given the iPad and the child was able to manipulate the entire iPad. But then on the other hand, when they gave the child a book, like a storybook, the child was trying to move it like how you move an iPad. Right? So the moral of the story very quickly is that the new social media world offers to learners and to educators an immense power to actually improve education, be cutting edge, and offer opportunity to our children, even in the social media industry that's one of the fastest growing industry, and that's good. However, it's really important that we recognize that some of the fundamental things that were central to our lives, of reading storybooks and parents feeling it's not good enough to sit on an iPod and say, oh, I'll listen to the story, but to sit and read the story, those were the things that actually made us who we are, who generate the kind of educators that we do. So with those words, I really like to congratulate the school. I was very happy to hear about the garden that you started. And I do think that part of what I'm seeing around the world at the moment is people sometimes think, the small things you do doesn't really add up. But at the end of the day, in the absence of political will on the part of most political leaders globally, as well as most business leaders globally, change to avert catastrophic climate change is only going to come from below. Unless all these kinds of initiatives bubble up in a massive way, our leaders are unlikely to act with the urgency that the situation calls for. So let me just end with this note. It's a little bit of a light story. I was in the United States recently, speaking to a group of big foundations. I'm sure the equivalent of your colleagues were there who also contribute donations. And I was saying the reality of the world we live in is that in 40 years, if we continue with the overfishing, dumping of toxics in our oceans, and the fact that there's more and more carbon that's going into the atmosphere, that's landing in our oceans, that in 4 decades our oceans could be dead if we don't change drastically now. Greenpeace is not saying this, but the scientific community is saying. On forests, every 2 seconds, a forest the size of a football field is disappearing. Right? Notwithstanding many battles and so on, Greenpeace and others are winning, we're not winning big enough, we're not winning fast enough. And the third and the biggest threat is climate change. The science says that emissions should peak by 2015 and should start coming down. And right now, politicians are in a state of denial. I'm not talking just about South Africa, but politicians globally are in a state of denial. We have one-to-one discussions with them, they'll say, yes, we get it, we know we need to act, and then when you walk out of the room, it's business as usual, right? So given all of those things, I was like trying to encourage this audience to get actively involved as I'm trying to encourage you. So this one irate African-American woman put up her hand and said, Kumi, have you heard of Martin Luther King? I said, yes. And she said, well, do you know what Martin Luther King's most famous speech was? Does anybody know? So I also thought it was I Have a Dream. But I thought it was like a trick question, so I didn't say it as confidently as you all said. I said, I have a dream. And she said, yes, it's I have a dream. It's not I have a nightmare. When I hear you speak, it sounds like you have a nightmare. Forests are dying. So, but the challenge for each of us as individuals and each of us as leaders moving forward is to find the right balance between speaking truth to power, but also speaking about it in a way that doesn't disempower people, make people feel there's nothing that they can do. There's a lot we can do in our homes, in our communities, and how we add our voice to encouraging our governments, our localities, and so on, to actually do much, much more. Because the struggle to avert catastrophic climate change is not some ethereal struggle about saving the planet, saving the environment, saving the climate. The struggle is about securing our children and grandchildren's future, and in my judgment, there can be nothing more important than that. And I'd like to applaud the principal and the teachers of Witteklip Secondary School for keeping alive a tradition that inspired people like Clive and me, and I hope will inspire a whole new generation of leaders that maybe 20 years from now, there will be somebody in this audience standing here and giving the same speech that I'm giving, saying, I'm grateful to Witteklip Secondary School. Thank you very much.